Mr. Gregory, which is the first thing that made you notice the strong link between Reformation and today's society?
Oh, well, that's a big question. I suppose it was thinking about the wide range of different views about the interpretation of the Bible in the early Reformation in Germany, and thinking about how ferocious, how contested those disagreements were and their consequences for the wider society. And then thinking about the kinds of polarization that we see in the political and social domains in the United States today, and thinking to myself, you know, if we take a broad enough perspective, the kinds of disagreements and conflicts that arose over the Bible in the 16th century have never really gone away. They've just been transformed and added to and subtracted from and changed in a whole different variety of ways. So there might be some interesting way to try to analyze the very long-term transformation between the Reformation era and the present about these kinds of issues.
Okay. Why did you decide to adopt this method? You divided the chapters by domains and not by centuries. Why this method is so important?
Yes, thank you for the question. It seemed to me that if one wants to try to understand different major areas of human life, like the exercise of political power, like different philosophical conceptions, like higher educational institutions and so forth, and one wants to try to get a sense of how they were transformed over time, then it's a better idea to emphasize and to concentrate on each of these, you know, conceived sort of as a whole, conceived on its own without losing sight of the whole, than it is to try to combine all of them in the ways that they were combined in a given century. Because in a certain sense, then one reconstructs the complexities that a genealogical approach helps you to clarify and to understand better.
Okay. And you choose some aspects of life,
yes,
and you had to leave apart other
yes,
aspects. Are you going to write about these other aspects, or?
I laugh because you asked this question not even knowing that originally I conceived the book in 12 chapters. So there were 6 other major areas, one about forms of communication, for example, from a manuscript and oral culture in the Middle Ages through the printing revolution of the 15th century, which is so important in the revolution, and bringing that all the way up to the internet and digital communication and so forth. I had another chapter planned out about the family, sex, and marriage. And so family relationships, sexuality, and these conceptions from a world in which, of course, even divorce is prohibited, all the way up through, you know, now with basically do-it-your-own, you know, conception of the family and so forth. But I originally thought that I would write a short book of 6 chapters and about 200 pages, and I would just put this essay out there and let people respond to it, and then I would take all the feedback and write the 12-chapter version. Well, that short 6-chapter book became the Unintended Reformation, so it was an unintended longer book than I wanted it to be originally. But to answer your question, I do not anticipate that I'm going to go back and answer the other domains. Another major one, the relationship, of course, between Europe and the rest of the world. This is one very much on people's minds now because of the interactions and globalization and so forth among different peoples. But having written a book almost 600 pages long about, and I think explaining a lot, I'm not going to, at this point I don't plan to go back and do the other ones.
Okay. You received many responses to your book.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the main critics you received, the more constructive ones?
Yeah, I'm glad you made that qualification, because I think some of the criticisms have been not only not constructive but also simply not accurate. They reflect not a careful reading of the book. I suppose some of the most constructive ones, they're kinds of critiques that are related to your last question about certain areas that could have been included that weren't. I think had I done that, it would have strengthened the argument itself. In other words, I think the book would have been a still stronger argument if I had done that. I think also certain kinds of suggestions about the way I might have included a wider range of primary sources. So hearing voices of actual actors, historical protagonists would have made maybe the book stronger as well. But most of the dissatisfaction with the book, I think, is the fact that I take the kind of critical attitude about the present that I do, and that some of my colleagues don't like. So I don't find that very constructive. We just disagree about the character of the present. So.
Thank you. Last question. Study the past is the way to understand the present. Can a historian imagine what the future will be?
Well, I think some historians try, but it's always a risky enterprise. I will say this, though, about that. Studying the past gives you a sense of the way in which very long-term, deep processes tend not to change quickly. That is, they tend not to change overnight. So I would imagine if I was going to predict some aspects of the future, I would, for example, continue to predict that the nation state is going to continue to be very important, the way that it has for the last several centuries. I would continue to predict that capitalist production and the consumer goods and so forth are going to continue to be a very important part of the future. I would predict that individualism and the protection of individual rights, the way that we have them in our contemporary, is going to continue to be very important into the future. History tends to change in radical ways only when there is a big cataclysm of some kind or another, a war, a revolution, and so we can't foresee it, and we don't know what the next one of those might be. They're usually not very pleasant, though, and I think it's not too much to imagine that perhaps we will be facing one somewhere down the road that is related to the environment and global warming.